She tried to rob his wagon. The cowboy said, "You forgot my last name. Before we begin, take a moment to comment. Your city. Where are you watching from tonight? And once this tale is done, don't forget to rate it from 0 to 10. Now, settle in and enjoy the story." Arizona Territory, 1879. The desert wind howled, carrying with it the scent of red dust and the ghost of old gunpowder. The sunset poured fire across the canyon walls, staining the sky the color of blood. At the edge of the trail, a ragged woman stepped into the wagon's path, eyes burning with a desperate fire. She raised a pistol, her voice hoarse but unyielding. "Get down! I don't want to shoot you, but I will, if I have to." The cowboy didn't flinch. He didn't rush. The iron heel of his boot scraped against the gravel as his hand brushed lazily across the butt of his revolver. And under that dying sun, he smiled. "If you're gonna rob me, you forgot something." Her brow furrowed. "What?" He stepped closer, voice steady as stone. "My last name." Later that same year, on the edge of a broken railroad line sat a town that had nearly given up. Rusted freight cars lay abandoned on the tracks. The saloon's doors swung loose in the wind, a broken piano inside spilling half-dead notes that faded into silence. Sand and dust crept into every crack of timber, as if trying to swallow the place whole. From the far end of the street came the slow, steady beat of hooves. A cowboy emerged, boots coated in dust, a wide-brimmed hat shadowing half his face. His name was Elias Thorne, a drifter in his 40s, not a hired gun, not a prospector anymore, just a man who had wandered long, seen too much, and carried in his eyes the weight of losses no one could count. The evening sun burned red against the wheels of his wagon, but that night, Elias wasn't carrying whiskey or ammunition. What awaited him was something else entirely. A pair of eyes staring back at him through the trembling barrel of a silver pistol. Her name was Julieta James, and Elias knew at once she wasn't a bandit. Not really. There was no hate in her gaze, no greed, only hunger, only desperation, and the fragile ember of hope, clutched tighter than life itself. Her hands shook until her knees gave way, and she collapsed. Elias didn't tie her down or drag her to the sheriff. Instead, he caught her before she hit the ground, draped his old wool coat across her shoulders, lit a fire, and cooked a pot of beans. By the glow of that campfire, she told him, halting, breathless, of the 2 children she had lost, sold off as labor in Prescott. When her words fell silent, Elias spoke only once. "Ride with me. I'll help you find your children. In return, you sit beside me on this wagon and help me haul goods across this land." It was a simple bargain, but it became the beginning of a journey that would change both their lives. Now let me ask you, if you were the cowboy riding into that forgotten town, what would be the very first thing you'd do? Part 1. The encounter on the trail. The trail stretched wide and endless across Arizona. 1979. The sun was sinking behind the red cliffs, casting the desert in the fiery glow of a dying flame. Dust swirled behind the wagon wheels, mixing with the hard clatter of hooves striking dry earth. Elias Thorne sat steady on the driver's seat, 41 years old. His weathered face bore the lines of time and travel. A wide-brimmed hat shadowed his eyes, yet it couldn't hide the quiet resolve etched into his features. His boots, worn and dulled with dust, pressed against the wooden footrest, each shift a reminder that this road had never promised safety. The desert wind whistled low through the canyon passes, carrying the faint ghost of old gunpowder, clinging like a memory that refused to fade. Elias had seen plenty in his years. Prospectors gone mad with greed, masked outlaws rising from the darkness, women abandoned on land that showed no mercy. He knew that when the sky burned red like this, trouble was never far ahead. Sure enough, as the wagon rounded a bend, Elias pulled the reins tight. Someone stood blocking the trail. A woman, her dress hung in tatters, the hem stained with dry mud. A frayed shawl whipped in the wind, framing eyes that burned with a desperate fire. In her hand, a silvered colt caught the last light of the sun. Her voice was hoarse, trembling yet firm. "Get down. I don't want to shoot you, but I will if I must." Elias didn't rush. His hand rested lazily near the grip of his revolver, but his gaze never touched it. He tilted slightly, letting the fading sun reveal his weathered face. Calm, unflinching. Then, almost unexpectedly, he smiled, a smile that softened the air, even under the weight of the pistol aimed at his chest. In that fragile silence, it wasn't a cowboy facing a bandit. It was a man staring into the eyes of a soul pretending to be dangerous, when all he saw was despair. The world grew still. Even the wagon horse pawed the ground uneasily, breath steaming in the cooling air. As if it too sensed the tension knotted between the two of them, Elias slowly lifted his hands, his voice low and steady. "All right, but if you're set on robbing me, you ought to know my name first." The woman's brow furrowed. "I don't care who you are." He nodded slightly, his eyes sharp as flint, yet his tone remained soft. "You will—" "Elias Thorne." The name carried through the dusk, heavy and sure, as though carved into the air itself. The woman's hand tightened on the trigger. Her body quivered, more from exhaustion than rage. "Step back." Slowly, Elias obeyed, each bootstep crunching on the gravel. His shadow stretched long across the dirt, mingling with hers, two worn lives colliding at the edge of a dying sun. His eyes never left hers, and in them he saw no hatred, only fear and hunger. He gave a faint chuckle, shaking his head. "You don't look like a thief." Her teeth clenched. Her voice snapped, though it cracked at the edges. "And you talk too much for a man staring down a gun." For the briefest moment, Elias's gaze softened. He noticed the details, the mud-caked hem of her dress, her trembling hand, the thin shawl that couldn't keep out the desert cold. They told him more than her threats ever could. "Whatever you think I've got," he murmured. "It isn't much." She climbed stiffly onto the wagon seat, movements sharp, uneasy. With shaky hands, she rummaged through the crates, pulling out a sack of flour, a bundle of dried apples, a small pouch of coins. She stuffed them into her dress, her pistol never leaving him. Elias brushed the dust from his coat, speaking softly, no mockery, no anger. "You forgot something." Her eyes narrowed. "What?" He stood tall, his gaze calm as the evening itself. "My last name." The words stilled the air. They weren't taunt nor challenge. They fell strange, disarming, leaving her eyes clouded with confusion. "What the hell are you talking about?" she whispered. "It means—" Elias stepped forward, his voice low and firm. "You're not really here to rob me. You're just reaching for something to hold on to. And if it came to it, you could even take my name." Her breath faltered. Her knees buckled. The pistol slipped from her hand, clattering against the stones. Elias moved swiftly, catching her before she struck the hard ground. Her body was frail, burning with fever, her breath ragged and dry. "Let me go," she rasped. "I don't need pity." "No." His voice was quiet, his coat wrapping firmly around her shoulders. "What you need is water, a warm meal, and someone who won't leave you lying in the dirt." Her lips quivered, tears pressing behind her eyes. I haven't eaten in 2 days." "I figured as much," Elias answered, like a whisper carried by the wind. Her strength gave out. Her arms trembled uselessly. At last, she surrendered, her voice breaking into a whisper. "Julieta, Julieta James. Elias nodded once, steady as the earth. All right, Julieta James. We'll find you water. Then we'll see what comes next. He lifted her gently onto the wagon seat, as though setting down something fragile, something worth keeping. Gripping the reins, Elias turned the team toward camp. Behind them, the sun bled away across the desert, leaving only dust and shadow. That night, the desert grew cold. Wind cut sharp across the plain, rustling thorn and stone. Elias built a fire by his camp, the flames flickering gold across his face, deepening the lines carved by years on the trail. Julieta sat huddled, his wool coat draped across her shoulders. The smell of beans and salted pork rose from a tin pot above the fire. She stared, throat tight with hunger, but her pride held her hands still. Elias didn't ask. He simply placed a wooden bowl before her. Eat, then talk. Silence hung, only the crack of burning wood and the soft whicker of horses. At last, she reached for the bowl, hands trembling. Tears spilled as she swallowed each bite. I have 2 children, she whispered. Della, 7. Drew, 5. Elias froze, his eyes fixed on the firelight. He added another log, saying nothing. They were in Prescott. I left them with a woman I trusted. Her voice cracked. When I came back, she'd sold them, said she needed the money. Elias's grip tightened on the bowl in his hands. The firelight mirrored in his eyes, deep and endless. He stepped closer, his hand resting firm on her shoulder. You'll bring them back, he said. I'll help you. Her tearful eyes lifted, searching him. Why? You don't know me. I tried to rob you. Elias's gaze didn't waver. His voice struck solid as bedrock. Because I believe in second chances, and because it takes courage to pull a gun. When begging might have been easier. Her chest shook with a muffled sob. The firelight revealed the cracks in her hard shell, the worn mother behind the pistol. By morning, the first light of dawn spread gold across the dry grass. Dew sparkled along the brim of Elias's hat like shards of glass. Julieta woke wrapped in his coat, the wagon untouched, the supplies still there, the night's fire now embers in the ash. Elias sat nearby, stirring coffee in a tin cup. His gaze stretched to the far horizon. You didn't turn me in, she asked hoarsely. No. Elias replied, you don't belong in a jail. You belong someplace safe. A brittle laugh escaped her, but it wavered with uncertainty. You don't know me. I know enough. He turned, his eyes steady. You're hungry. You're desperate. But you're not a killer. Her hands clenched tight. Words rose, but stuck in her throat. For a moment, all she heard was the whisper of wind and his voice, cutting the chains she'd carried too long. Elias rose, drawing out a folded map, marked with hand-sketched trails and towns. He laid it before her. You help me haul freight. I help you find your children. That's fair. Julieta stared at the map, then at him. Doubt clouded her eyes. But for the first time, a spark of hope glimmered deep within them. The desert trail stretched on, endless and uncertain. But from that moment forward, it carried more than one story. It carried Julieta James, no longer a desperate bandit, but a mother prepared to fight for her children. What began as a standoff had become a promise that bound 2 fates together. Part 2. The road to her children. The desert stretched out like a golden sea of dust, endless and unforgiving. Wagon wheels ground against the cracked earth, leaving long scars across the barren plain. On the driver's bench, Elias Thorne held the reins steady. Beside him, Julieta sat upright, her shawl drawn close, though it could not hide the frailty of her frame. They spoke little. Words were less necessary than the steady rhythm of hooves and the whistle of the wind. From time to time, Elias glanced her way. She never turned back, her eyes fixed on the horizon, on the imagined faces of 2 children who might be waiting, imprisoned somewhere, hoping their mother would come. That night, they camped near a shallow creek bed. The fire was small, just enough for warmth. Elias roasted strips of dried meat, handing her a portion. She took it, but ate sparingly, her hollow eyes refusing to rest. "You don't trust me," Elias said, his tone calm. Without reproach, Julieta was silent at first. Then, softly, she answered, "I can't trust anyone. The last person I trusted sold my children." Elias's weathered hands tightened, then eased again. He stared into the flames. "Then think of me as a fool, trying to buy back a little trust for the both of us." She looked at him, startled. In his eyes there was no pity, only the steady strength of an oak that had weathered countless storms. For the first time, she allowed herself a breath that wasn't choked with fear. By the following day, they reached a small town by the abandoned rail line. Rusted cars leaned off the tracks. A saloon door swung on loose hinges. Drunken men stumbled in and out. Elias reined in the wagon and stepped down first, his eyes sharp with caution. Julieta walked at his side, her hair falling in disarray to hide her face. She avoided the stares. Elias did not. He met each gaze without flinching, tipping his hat to the bartender before lowering his voice with questions. They pieced together fragments of rumor. A boy at the livery swore he'd seen two quiet brown-haired children led away by a stranger. An old woman at the market confirmed it. The little ones had been sold to work at a ranch in the southern valley. Julieta's hands clenched her sleeves until the veins stood white. Elias steadied her elbow, grounding her before she shattered. "We'll find them," he whispered. For a moment, a flicker of hope lit her eyes, but it faltered beneath the weight of fear. What if it wasn't them? What if they'd been taken farther still? Elias said nothing more. He led her from the town as the sun fell. On the trail, he handed her a folded map. "Tomorrow, we ride to that valley. Whatever waits, we'll see it with our own eyes." Julieta nodded, her trembling fingers holding the paper. That night, she did not sleep. The small firelight flickered in her eyes like two fragile embers, fragile but unwilling to die. The next afternoon, they reached the valley. The ranch loomed through the red dust, its fences sagging, walls of weathered timber leaning against time. A burly man with a heavy beard stepped out, his eyes narrowing at the strangers. Elias dismounted first, his stare sharp as a drawn blade. Julieta followed, her heart pounding. "We're looking for two children," Elias said evenly. "Brown hair, a girl named Della, a boy named Drew." The rancher squinted, then nodded slowly. "Bought a pair like that. Good workers." Julieta lunged forward, but Elias caught her, holding her steady with a firm arm. His voice dropped, cold and certain. "They're hers, and you'll give them back." The man smirked. "I paid for them. You think I'll hand them over? Not so simple." Elias straightened, his hand hovering near his revolver. The wind whipped his coat, dust swirling through the fading light. The air drew taut, as though the world held its breath. "I'll pay double," Elias said, his voice steady. His eyes never left the man. The moment dragged long, heavy. Finally, the rancher spat into the dirt. "Take 'em!" "Not worth the trouble." Julieta broke free, rushing toward the barn. The door groaned open, and there, two small figures huddled in the straw. Their eyes widened, filled with fear. "Della," Julieta whispered. The little girl rose cautiously, voice trembling. "Mama." The word tore her heart wide open. Julieta collapsed, pulling both children into her arms, sobbing as though she were a child herself. Elias stood outside, his eyes closed. He did not step inside. That moment belonged to them. That night, the campfire blazed brighter than ever before. Della and Drew slept bundled beneath thick blankets in the wagon, their breathing soft. Safe, Julieta sat close to the fire, her eyes swollen red, yet shining with joy. The lines of grief on her face had softened, if only for now. Across from her, Elias cradled a tin cup of coffee, silent, watchful. "You were right," Julieta whispered through tears. They still knew me. I was so afraid they wouldn't." Elias nodded, his voice gentle as the desert wind. "Nothing can break the bond between a mother and her children. Not even this land." She looked at him for a long while. In her gaze now was not only gratitude, but respect, and the faint spark of trust she thought she'd lost forever. "Thank you." "Elias Thorne," she said. He didn't answer at once. He fed another stick of wood to the fire, letting the flames leap higher, their light falling across her face. Then he spoke slowly, steady as always. "We've only come halfway. The rest is finding a place where all of you can begin again." Julieta's arms folded tight around herself as she watched her children sleeping. For the first time in years, she believed she could. For the first time, she believed in a beginning. Part the through. The abandoned homestead near Sanada. The dirt road stretched hard and dry, like the back of an old steer. It led them to a homestead that stood alone against the fading prairie. The roof slanted southward, tired as an old man's spine. Weathered boards rattled against the wind, groaning like memories that refused to die. The front door sagged from its hinge, one last patch of paint clinging stubbornly to the wood. Off in the distance, the railroad carved a dark line across the horizon, freight cars silent as a herd of buffalo fallen asleep in drought. On the porch, a rocking chair lay tipped on its side, one arm broken, sand collecting in its hollow. Elias stepped down from the wagon, his boots scratching a scar into the packed earth. He walked the porch, testing each plank, each nail gone gray. Della clung to her mother's hand, while Drew peeked shyly from under the wagon's canvas, eyes wide as coins. The prairie wind carried the scent of rust and burnt grass, making the canvas breathe like tired lungs. "This place belonged to my cousin once," Elias said, his voice cutting clean through the stillness. "He left for the north. Nobody's touched it since." From his pocket, he drew a blackened key, its teeth worn bright at the tips. He didn't hand it over right away. He opened his palm, letting the evening sun glint off the metal. "If you want it," he said, his eyes on Julieta. "It's yours." She stood at the threshold, her foot brushing the line of shadow beneath the porch roof. Her fingers grazed the splintered doorframe, raising a breath of damp dust. She didn't say thank you. She didn't ask why. She only drew in a long breath, tasting the air of a fate she wasn't sure she could claim. When she closed her fingers around the key, her body trembled like a wire drawn taut after a storm. The door creaked open into a single room. Dust hung in shafts of sunlight, drifting like schools of tiny fish. It coated the iron stove, the leaning shelf, the sagging rope bed. Della wandered slowly, tilting her head back to watch the floating specks. Drew crouched low, whispering to a beetle crawling across the floorboards. Julieta moved to the window. The latch was stuck. She pressed with both hands, veins straining, until it snapped loose with a hollow clang that sent sparrows scattering from the eaves. Light poured in, washing the boards, exposing every scar of time. She turned, her eyes meeting Elias's. For the first time, there was no suspicion, only a silent question. Could this place hold 4 breathing souls? Outside, Elias tested the well pump. The iron groaned, spitting a thread of water. He cupped it, tasted, then nodded. Stone lining, not wood. "It'll hold." He handed her the dipper. She touched it to her lips, teeth knocking at the cold. The shock wasn't chill. It was truth. Overhead, Iyawam and Ishiwam. A hawk circled the sky. In Julieta's pocket, The key burned warm with sunlight, like a coal she couldn't let go. The stories of the West always spoke of robberies and gunfights, yet here a story began with a broken door and the word stay. The first morning, Elias set a ladder against the roof. The beams were soft with rot, bent like the backs of worn-out mules. He handed Della a tin of nails, gave Drew a hammer, heavy as his small hands could bear. Julieta tied her hair, rolled her sleeves, and took up the saw. The rasp of blade through dry wood sounded like wind slicing the hide of cactus. "Don't step there," Elias warned, tapping a hollow spot with his boot. "That part's waiting to swallow a fool." He smiled, a half-joke to ease the weight, then pressed hot tar into the seams, squinting against the sun. They worked without many words. The hammer spoke, the nails spoke, their sweat spoke. Julieta shifted planks, her toes searching for balance. Her shadow skimmed across the roof like the tail of a kite. Then, with one last stroke, the beam beneath her groaned. The plank lurched, the world spun roof, sky, porch blurring until a hand seized her wrist. Elias, his pull was firm, dragging her back against the slope. His knee struck hard against the ridge, but his breath was steady, planted like a post driven deep in earth. "I've got you," he said, not a promise, not bravado, just the truth. Julieta collapsed onto the roof, laughing and crying all at once. She hated the feeling of falling. It reminded her of the nights her children vanished, of doors slamming shut, of silence pressing thick. It had been so long since someone told her the simple truth. "I've got you." By afternoon, clouds rolled over the hills. The first drops tapped the patched roof, soft as fingers testing a fiddle string. Then more came, steady, drumming. The wood swelled, the tar darkened. Inside, Della squealed when no water leaked through. Drew placed a tin cup beneath the beam, waiting for a drip. None came. Only one stubborn drop slipped through, falling into Julieta's open palm. She turned her hand, and the droplet broke. Her tears yesterday had been bitter. This one was sweet. She laughed, damp and weightless. Elias glanced over, eyes narrowing in a smile. Outside, the curtain of rain blurred the scars of memory. That night, the storm eased. The house breathed. The porch breathed. 4 souls breathed together. Somewhere far away, a harmonica drifted through the wind, a tune out of step with its town. Here, a new rhythm began. Quiet, steady, wordless. The next day, Elias hauled out old iron piping from the shed, testing each piece with a tap. "The line to the side spring's clogged," he said. "Clear it. The water will rise clean." He lowered the bucket with a pulley, the rope groaning like old bones. Julieta knelt, pulling roots from the pipe, as if plucking thorns from her own throat. On the third draw, the bucket rose heavy. Water shimmered like a child's eyes. Drew reached forward, but Elias stopped him, grinning. "Let your mama test it first. Her nose will tell." Julieta sniffed the dipper stone cool. "Clean." They poured it into a trough. Della bent low, her tangled hair touching the surface, ripples scattering the sunlight into silver shards. Julieta cupped water, washing the dust from her daughter's hair. Drew splashed her face, laughing until she sputtered. It was the first laughter to pierce the guarded walls of her chest. Later, she stood in the doorway, staring at the old lock. "I want a latch on the inside," she said, her voice steady, though old pain trembled beneath it. "The kind a child can close, so no one can open the door from outside." Elias didn't ask why. He sat on the step, carving a piece of oak into a latch. Each stroke of his knife was patient, like a prayer. He smoothed the edges, drove small nails to hold it. When it clicked into place, Julieta flinched. Then again, she let Della try. Drew, standing on tiptoe, Cack. Each sound was a stone laid in the foundation of trust. My mother once told me, Julieta whispered, staring out the porch. A house isn't just a roof. It's a latch that listens to a trembling hand. She smiled faintly, then fell quiet. Elias only adjusted the fit of the latch, silent, steady. By evening, clouds gathered over the hills. Rain struck the patched roof, but no leak came through. Inside, the children slept curled beneath patched quilts, their breathing easy. On the third morning, Elias dragged an old table from the shed, sanding it down to build a new hearth. Julieta baked cornbread, its sweet char hiding in the children's hair. Together, they tested beams, shored up corners, tightened wires. Each task finished, Elias tapped the post with his hammer, not as a mark, but as if to say, we lived here one more moment. Near noon, a widow from half a mile west came by on her mule, Ruth, carrying cornbread and a bundle of sage. She stepped onto the porch without ceremony, looked through the kitchen, and smiled with her eyes. The house can hear people again, she said. Julieta stiffened, unsure how to accept such warmth. But Ruth's kindness fell straight as sunlight. Della tugged at her dress to ask about chicks. Drew begged to see her pruning knife. The thread of community tightened another knot. That afternoon, Elias hung an old horseshoe above the door. Julieta placed her palm against the cold iron, whispering words for no one but herself, for the names she had left along the road. Then she picked up Elias's small carving knife, pressed it to the porch post, and began to cut, slow strokes, resin bleeding from the old wood. Her hand trembled, but she did not stop. Della and Drew stood close, watching in silence. Elias stayed behind her, not touching, but near enough for her to lean if she faltered. When the sun slid low, its light caught fresh carved letters. Julieta Thorne. Half her old name was gone. The rest stretched longer than a lifetime. She laid down the knife, tracing the grooves with her fingertip as though feeling an old wound finally closed. Tears didn't fall hard. They came slow, enough to salt her lips, to cling to her hair. Elias handed her a handkerchief. We'll plant beans along the east side, he said simply. Tomatoes near the kitchen. The morning sun will serve them well. Julieta nodded. In the kitchen, the cornbread cooled. In the room, the rope bed smelled not of dust, but of children. On the porch, her name rested carved in wood, opening the door to the days ahead. That night, Elias lit a lamp. Warm light pushed the dark back to the fence line. 4 bowls sat neatly on the table. Julieta poured water, her hand brushing his. She did not flinch. The latch clicked shut from inside. The desert wind still howled. Trains still groaned beyond the horizon. Iron still scraped wood in some distant saloon. But here, in this house, 4 breaths joined as one, thick and warm as a well-banked fire. The place that had been nothing more than a shelter now bore a new name, home, and in that home, a Western romance found no need for vows or thunder, only the nod of a man and the carved letters of a woman. One day, perhaps, someone would call it one of the best Wild West stories, not for its guns or blood, but for the simple truth it whispered. Sometimes, to survive, a soul needs a roof, a latch, and a name. Tonight, it needed only the shadows of 4 bodies cast across the wooden floor, stretching long, then short again as the lamp dimmed, and a child's soft murmur of Mama Rose from a dream. Part 4. The season of building. Spring returned to the Arizona plains, though the earth still cracked dry as the pages of a forgotten Bible. Elias pressed the plow into the stubborn ground, sweat darkening the coarse cloth of his shirt. Beside him, Julieta walked steadily, dropping beans and corn into the furrows. Della and Drew followed close behind, poking holes with sticks, covering seeds with dirt, as if it were a game. The scrape of iron against stone rang sharp. The mule snorted and tossed its head. Elias held firm, shoulders taut beneath the sun. Julieta watched him work, saw the patience in each movement. No hurry, no anger, only the steady insistence of a man coaxing the land to open. By noon, they rested beneath the shade of a lone oak. Julieta drew cornbread from her cloth bag and handed it to him. Elias ate slow, his eyes on the newly turned rows. Tough ground, he murmured, but seeds know how to find their way. Same as people. Julieta looked at his calloused hands, then at her children, rolling in the dust, laughing. For the first time, the picture in her mind wasn't of slamming doors or drawn pistols. It was of a porch roof, where simple meals could be shared, where laughter was not fleeting. That afternoon, when the sun burned low, Elias knelt in the furrow, wiping sweat from his brow. His voice dropped, almost carried off by the wind. I want to build something lasting with you, if you'll let me. Julieta froze. The seed in her hand slipped, falling into the dirt. She didn't meet his eyes. She pressed the soil gently over the seed, whispering, I'm staying. No further words, only dry earth, hidden seeds, and a promise buried deep waiting to sprout. The next week, they built a fence. Elias felled mesquite at the valley's edge, his axe ringing against the stubborn wood. Julieta hauled branches, tied rope, drove nails. Della and Drew hammered tiny stakes into the ground, declaring it their chicken fort. One evening, lifting a heavy log, Elias faltered. The old wound in his shoulder flared sharp, sending him off balance. Julieta rushed to his side, bracing him with both hands. His breath came hard, sweat running down his jaw. Old injury? She asked. He nodded. Horse threw me into rock years back. Thought it healed. Sometimes, it remembers, Julieta tore a strip of cloth and bound his shoulder firm. Her fingers trembled, but her grip was strong. The wind lifted strands of her hair across his cheek. Elias said nothing, only held her gaze. Eyes scarred but steady, meeting eyes that carried their own wounds. When the fence stood tall, Drew shouted, The chickens can't escape now. Julieta laughed, the sound ringing clear as a bell, scattering the fog that had long haunted her heart. That night by the fire, she whispered, I thought I'd build fences alone forever, just me and the children. Elias tapped a nail against the wood, each strike steady. Then, quietly, not anymore. She met his eyes through the firelight. No more words were needed. One morning, Ruth the widow from the West Ridge arrived on her mule, bringing 2 hens and a rooster. For the little ones to learn, she said with a smile. Della clutched a hen tight. Drew cradled his like it was treasure. Together, they built a coop along the new fence. Elias cut boards. Julieta tied wire. The children spread straw. By evening, the cluck of chickens rose, strange yet comforting. Julieta watched, tears glinting in her eyes. Elias frowned gently. You crying? She wiped quickly. No, just, it's the first thing I've owned in years. He sat beside her. Not yours alone, ours. Her gaze lingered on him, steady, unflinching. At last she nodded, accepting a truth that had already taken root. That night, Della placed the first egg into her mother's palm. Mama, this one's for you. Julieta broke. She pulled both children close, weeping freely. Elias stood in the doorway, his shadow long in the moonlight, eyes fixed on the scene as if he might etch it forever. Summer came, heavy with dust storms. Winds tore across the valley, rain lashing in sudden fury. Elias tied ropes across the roof beams. Julieta ran for the washing. The children huddled their chickens close. Inside, The fire glowed. Beans simmered. Warmth pushing back the chill. Julieta wrapped blankets around her little ones, sitting close to the hearth. Elias fed the fire, his face calm, lined but steadfast. "This rain might ruin the seedlings," she whispered. "Let the ground drink." Elias replied, "By morning, you'll see green stronger than before." Julieta leaned against the wall, her eyes on the flames. Her life, she thought, was like those seeds once thought dead, but given rain, given hands that steadied, ready to rise again. When the children finally slept, she asked softly, "Did you ever think we'd have a home like this?" Elias sat silent a long while. Then he answered, "I once lost everything, but now I believe I can build again." "With you?" She said nothing, only pulled the blanket tighter. But in her heart, the answer thundered. "I'm staying." Autumn rolled in. Bean rows bloomed purple. Corn stood tall. The fence held. The chicken coop bustled. Elias rebuilt the shed, stacking shelves, neat as rows of prayers. Julieta wove cloth, hung laundry to dry in the sun. One afternoon, Elias split wood while Drew carried him water. He smiled, ruffling the boy's hair. From the kitchen, Della's voice rang out, "Mama, the bread is ready." The air filled with scents of hearth and grain. With the echoes of voices that belonged, Julieta stood on the porch, wiping her hands on her apron. Before her stretched a life she thought forever lost. A man at work, children calling, a kitchen rich with warmth, a fence standing guard, a lamp ready to be lit. Elias set down his axe, walked to her, and said, voice firm as a hammer on oak, "I want to build something lasting with you. If you'll let me this time." Julieta did not look away. She reached up, brushing sweat from his brow. Then she nodded. "I'm staying." Not a vow, not a flourish, just a quiet truth, light as wind. But it struck Elias's chest like thunder, and his eyes shone. The sunset poured gold over them, stretching their shadows long across the earth. No witness but sky and soil. Yet, in that fading light, a promise was set deeper than any contract, firmer than ink rooted in earth, bound by breath. Part 5. A promise beneath the cottonwood. Spring returned to the valley like a long sigh after a winter that had overstayed its welcome. Wildflowers dotted the grass pale yellow as butter, violet as ink spilled thin. The creek behind the house sang soft against broken stones near the old cottonwood, a tree that had stood since before the railroad carved its scar across the horizon. That morning, its branches shimmered silver in the breeze as 4 figures made their way down the worn path. Julieta set a cloth basket on the table beneath the tree. Cornbread, a pinch of salt, ribbons she had sewn the night before. Her fingertips were sore, pricked by needles, but a quiet smile tugged at her lips. Della carried a bundle of wildflowers, pollen dusting her arms gold. Drew clutched a length of rope Elias had braided for him, his prized cowboy rope. Elias came last, carrying a small wooden box, sanded smooth. Inside lay 2 simple rings, braided from sun-cured leather. No gold, no silver, just hide, weathered and strong. He looked at Julieta, a smile caught in his throat, as if holding it back made the moment steadier. "Ruth said she'll be here soon," Julieta murmured, adjusting the half-finished lace at her collar. Her voice was calm, though her throat was as dry as a desert crossing. Elias only tightened the blue kerchief at his neck and watched the children scatter petals in the grass. There are mornings a person waits a lifetime for, not for trumpets or fine clothes, but for the small things built by hand. A latch a child could fasten, a rope bed that no longer sagged, a fence that held, all of it woven together into something larger, a life that might endure. Elias laid his palm against the cottonwood's bark, knocking 3 times as though asking leave. Julieta stood a step back, glancing at the house. From the east window, Ruth had lit a lamp. Its glow spilled faint across the dirt, like a beacon for wanderers to find their way home. Ruth arrived on her gray mule, cheeks flushed from the chill, arms carrying sage to burn. For when the words are weighty, she said, setting the bundle by the roots. She nudged Julieta's shoulder lightly, the way older women do when they want to say, "I'm here." From her pocket, she drew a letter, sealed in wax. "From my nephew in Patagonia," she explained. Elias broke it open, scanning quickly, until his eyes stilled on the judge's seal. "The papers are signed," he said at last, voice low, so the wind wouldn't carry it off. "The adoption is done." Every line, every word. Silence fell heavy. Julieta's heart struck her ribs like a hammer. Della and Drew inched closer, eyes wide. Ruth placed a hand on their backs. "Your names will grow one word longer," she said gently, "but your hearts will grow a whole roof wider." Elias folded the letter, placing it on the stone beside the sage. He didn't hand it to Julieta. He only gave her his eyes, as if offering her the key to a door that had long stood open. She touched the edge of the paper, drew back, then touched it again. Each movement draining years of guarded strength. "Will you witness?" Elias asked Ruth. "There's nothing more worth my time," she answered. She lit the sage, green smoke curling upward, carrying the clean scent of memory healed. She whispered an old prayer. No church, no creed, just words for calloused hands, children's eyes, and homes that stand straight in the wind. The preacher came on foot, trousers muddy, Bible soft, from years of use. He asked where to stand. Ruth pointed to the cottonwood's roots, an altar the sky itself had kept. Julieta's hand brushed unconsciously at the carved words on their porch post. Julieta Thorne. She remembered the click of the new latch, the raindrop in her palm, the taut ropes of the bed. Small things had carried her to this moment, where no gun barrel waited only words that needed speaking. The children stepped into place at Ruth's nod. Della went first, Drew following close, each holding a fistful of petals. Gently, Della reminded, petals drifted down like whispered rain, catching in Julieta's hair. Clinging to Elias's shoulder, their laughter loosened the tightness in Julieta's chest. The preacher read a short passage about keeping hands, keeping eyes, keeping vows. Not a warning, just a story of travelers crossing desert storms by leaning on each other. "Children," he said, "will you scatter flowers again? Whenever the grown folk forget that wild things bloom with only a little rain." Della grinned. Drew nodded sharp as a hammer blow. The laughter that followed was as fresh as spring's first rain on tin. Elias opened the wooden box, lifting the leather rings. His hands trembled, not with fear, but with reverence for what such small things must carry. "Not gold," he said, his gaze steady on Julieta. "But these have walked the trail with me. They've stretched, shrunk, cracked, and been mended with oil. That's what I want our years to be worn, where they should be, mended, where they must." Julieta extended her hand. The ring slid on, snug, as if it had always been waiting. She closed her eyes, and in a breath, she saw again the hunger, the barn straw, the rain in her palm, the name carved in wood. All the pieces had come home. "I'm no man of words," Elias said softly, so even the cottonwood seemed to lean close. "I'll rise before the sun, mend the roof, keep the latch closed, and open it when you or the children knock. I'll call your name when the wind rises. I'll not leave unless we all leave together." Julieta's eyes opened. Clear and steady. "I lived on doubt," she said, "but you've taught me to live on trust. Your soul will come. I'll tend the hearth, keep the jars filled, teach the children to read and count seeds. I'll stand when the wind breaks against us, and if you fall, I will lift. I take your name, not to hide, but to stand beside. The preacher closed his Bible with a smile. Then, before this cottonwood, before earth and sage and these two watchful eyes, I declare, you are each other's. No shout, just a nod. Some truths are stronger spoken low. Petals fell again. Drew laughed at having saved his handful too long. Their laughter joined, light and free. By evening, neighbors gathered with no fanfare, bread, honey, coats smelling of old snow. Ruth set down fresh milk. The preacher drew a fiddle from his sack, strings worn thin, but enough to wheeze out Home Sweet Home. Elias circled Julieta slow, not in waltz but in step, as though moving through rough country together. Their shadows lengthened and drew close again, breathing in rhythm. Later, Julieta knelt, calling her children near. From today, she whispered, voice trembling in a new way. The papers only say what my heart already knew. Elias is your pa. Drew looked at the letter, then at Elias, then at Julieta. He drew breath like a boy before a jump. Pa, he said simply. Elias closed his eyes. The leather ring seemed to tighten on his finger, binding that word forever. He knelt, and the children crashed into him. Awkward, perfect. Ruth turned aside, whispering something to the cottonwood the young could not hear. The fiddle strings snapped sharp. The preacher chuckled. Tying it off, that's enough music, he said. Outside, the true song rose, chickens clucking, water running, footsteps on old wood. Night fell. Lamps glowed in the windows. 4 bowls stood on the table. Julieta's hand brushed Elias's, and this time it did not startle her. The door latched with a soft click from inside. The desert wind still cried. The rails still groaned on the horizon. But in this house, 4 breaths rose together, thick and warm as banked fire, from strangers to kin, from survival to a life shared. No gunfire, no trumpet, only a roof, a name, a latch drawn from within, and 4 steady breaths until dawn laid its first gold on the east window. That year, the harvest came rich, barley bowed, corn heavy, hens bustling, chimney smoke curling skyward each evening like a finger beckoning home. Supper was plain cornbread, beans, honey, but none left the table wishing for more, and in the middle of it, Drew's voice broke the hush. Sticky with honey, he looked at Elias and whispered again, Pa. Elias laid a hand on the boy's shoulder, steady as the plains. In his eyes, the wide frontier narrowed into a single word, family. Julieta's whisper carried softly across the table. We've found each other and built a place to belong. Outside, the cottonwood dropped its white seeds, drifting like witnesses, not a loud vow, but a promise kept one day at a time. Happiness, it turns out, is never stolen. It is built piece by piece, season by season,